I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening.
Uber rich sex parties. Now, I am fairly bound by a few NDAs, so I'm going to treat this as a little bit of a fictional storytelling time. But it will have elements of things that I have experienced in my career. I have been getting hired. This is all fictitious. I have been getting hired for sex parties, left, right, and center. And yes, some are ones that maybe I would already be going to, but there are some that are perhaps not quite my usual social circles. The lands of the billionaires. Definitely not what I was born into. But these uber rich sex parties have been popping up a little bit more these last couple of years. At least for me. Maybe they were around before, but nobody wanted to invite me. But they've been finding me on my social channels. They've been emailing me from afar, asking whether I would be interested to attend and manage dungeons worldwide. Now, sometimes these queries or invitations come with PowerPoint presentations. Sometimes they come through an intermediary that might have maybe owned a sex club and is now chartered with looking after the sexual life of somebody with far too much money. But these invitations come sometimes last minute, sometimes not. This is not really turning into a clear fictional story, is it? And I get flown away, whisked across the world to far-flung places, not normally in the center of cities, where castles and super yachts and mega houses with elevators have been transformed over weeks to create labyrinths of themed rooms, all for the purposes of sexuality and decadence experienced for usually the person hosting the party at its central core. So who runs these parties? People who obviously have a huge budget. What is the point of them? I think they're just looking for entertainment and a good time. And these can sometimes go from the budget of a Netflix subscription to that of a 2-week affair where you've flown in 100 people from across the world so that you can have a nice time looking at pretty things, having deviance in front of your very eyes. A live show, so to speak. And what is my part in these live entertainment pieces for the rich? Maybe I should set out what they kind of look like first. Remember, this is all fictitious. These spaces are often places that are already quite outstanding. Mansions, castles, yachts, caves. And they are transformed into wonderlands, often around a central theme or story that maybe is acted out over many days. And how they populate this place is they hire production teams who hire beautiful, talented people. Maybe these beautiful, talented people are actors by nature. Maybe they are escorts. Maybe they are... Who else has been at these things? Performers of some sort. Maybe they are security. But there's also set dressers and costumers and makeup artists. And there's a lot of people that go into these productions. Sometimes it's in the hundreds for only 40 guests. Sometimes it's in the hundreds for only 5 guests. But they need to populate these, right? And I've seen them populate them with some of the most outstanding looking people in the world. I'm not exactly sure how they find them. Sometimes I get these little messages on Instagram that makes me feel like it might be the way they're doing their outreach. But this fictitious party that I'm describing are often populated by incredibly beautiful women in a great surplus in comparison to the men. And they are often, quite young. Younger than me, that's for sure. And they are not necessarily required to do anything. They might be given a dress code, but they are there to be beautiful. And there are also ones who are hired there specifically to attend to the sexual needs of usually the main clients. But yeah, if you had told me that this kind of thing was happening, I don't know if I would have understood the production capacity of this kind of an extravaganza before. I think I would have thought more along the lines of, a pop-up day or night where a group of people who already maybe even know each other, who are maybe 40 or odd so of them, incredibly rich, sure, but are coming together on an even keeling and having a sexual sort of orgy kind of style of thing. But I didn't quite understand, maybe I'm naive, to the fact that these things could be huge, massive productions. And I think a lot of the times when I'm signing the NDAs, it is protecting the creative capacity, but obviously it's also identities and exact shenanigans. But we can be quite general, I think, in the things that are populating the space. And it is pretty amazing, actually. I would really like to attend as a guest, perhaps, at some of these parties, but I never got invited when I was younger. And that seems to be the demographic. Yeah, so sometimes you get rooms where I'm supervising, where obviously things are more along the lines of the dungeon. And sometimes I will facilitate experiences for people who have yet to experience it. Sometimes things are more on a tantric angle. Sometimes they're more about storytelling and experiential, and people are blindfolded, and there's stories that are whispered into their ears, and actions that are whispered onto their bodies. But basically it's, a facilitator of excitement and sensuality and entertainment, often for people who perhaps are not able to go so freely to more public-facing sex parties, or who enjoy a certain level of extravaganza. But yeah, the detailing that they can go into, I've been in a wardrobe for hours, being dressed to the tiny little detail. And it does really make an incredible difference. It's interactive theater. It's like on a real unabashed scale, which I guess brings me to one element that I do quite found a little bit shaky. And that element is consent. I understood that as more of a private event, that there's somewhat of a contract when you're entering the space that is maybe not as spoken as some of the events that I'm used to going to, where there are club rules and you're queried on that on entering. But I was still a little bit taken aback sometimes by the access that usually women feel that they have to touching me and interacting with me in those spaces. It's kind of maybe a first experience for a lot of these people, and they are not yet versed in the language of consent. I think, thankfully, that even in those spaces, the language of consent has touched men more than it used to. And I do see them asking and being more well-behaved than I was maybe used to in my youth. But yeah, that was a little bit shocking. But actually, I've never witnessed anything too untoward. And I've even been to some parties where the lead person will very much speak through respect and asking for enthusiastic consent. So there can be quite a range in terms of how versed people are as well. But yeah, sometimes I'm working for 8 hours managing spaces. Sometimes I'm working for 15 minutes interacting with 5 people. So it's really quite all over the place what people's expectations of me are when it comes to these spaces. But essentially, I didn't quite understand that there was so much room for so much budget for what is essentially entertainment value. And sometimes you see some of these clientele who don't even interact at all. Maybe they're just there to kind of view the spectacle. Very expensive spectacle that requires a lot of moving parts. It almost looks like they're not actually even sure how to interact, or that it's something that they even want to interact with. Yeah, so I think that sometimes it's something that people want to really fuck at in terms of the clients. It's sometimes something they just want to see. And how do I feel about all of this? I mean, I think artistically, it's pretty amazing to see all the performers and the people dressing everything and the production crew have such a beautiful, elaborate project to be able to execute. I really enjoy seeing the creativity and the professionalism. Just maybe not how somebody would normally review a sex party. But as somebody who didn't necessarily grow up with access to wealth, I mean, there were some schools that I went to where I was around people with great wealth, but it would kind of be every now and then, not necessarily a part of my everyday. So I'm not hugely acclimatized to it in a numbing fashion. So when I see it, you know, these yachts that are bigger than my apartment building, and yeah, and the like, it's quite overwhelming, I guess, to witness the disparity for such a momentary experience. And one can only hope that it is less momentary for the people who are spending the money, but I don't think so necessarily. I think it's just another illustration of the disparity, perhaps. And how do I feel about being a part of it? I mean, I think that, yet again, another episode turns into my philosophical look into my own life. But how do I feel about being a part of such an extravaganza? I guess I feel a little bit like in the camp of observing the staff, right? I am staff. And I'm grateful for an opportunity to express myself in a way that I guess, frankly, is enabled by budget, right? And obviously, it's great to have a gig and be able to support the things that I need to support myself, etc. But yeah, this is just life. Well, at least how I see it, right? The disparity and the conflict, and there are many things that you must hold in one hand in order to survive our existence. Yet another tagline that is definitely not used on a sex party. But I would like to go to that one if somebody wants to create such a philosophical dilemma of a themed sex party. But I continue to accept these invitations, and I really love the crews that I work with. And it is an experience when you know some of the crews, when you get to know them. It's quite a communing sort of vibe and a familial sort of vibe. And it's a great way to feel a social cohesion amongst like-minded folk. So on the crew end of things, I find it very heartwarming. On the guest experiential side of things, I find it pretty awe-inspiring, but also confusing. And yeah, if you had told me about this kind of an experience before I started working, I think I would have been really wide-eyed and intrigued and probably really allowed myself to sink into the experience and had sex with many people. But these days, I guess, been around the block, wondering what the catering is. Oh, and how much rest I'll get before the next shift. And admiring how well some of these people are working with the clientele and how charming they can be. And yeah, and so there's a lot of moving parts, and I guess I admire anybody who produces an event as well. It's really an extreme version of what I have to do. Managing all of these emotions and people and things that could go wrong. And yeah, I guess there's people who seek thrills in all sorts of ways. But I say this as I'm about to move off into another little round of such trips, and I really look forward to seeing everybody. And actually, upon reflection, they're fairly innocent affairs. Maybe, again, this is me being around the block, sort of an opinion. But yeah, I guess there's something about the temporality of it and the social contract of coming into that space and the decoration and the theater and the campness that make it enduring in some ways to me, and therefore seemingly innocent or heartwarming. I can understand how all of these adjectives were maybe something I would not have completely understood before I stepped into such spaces, but maybe my familiarity with sexuality and play enables that kind of a thing. So overall, I think I get to take away quite a valuable and positive experience for it, but probably the greatest disparity is just seeing such grand displays and executions of wealth that could be very useful elsewhere. So there's that. I did a really terrible job of describing a fictional party, didn't I? I just kind of told you parts of many things. So maybe let's end with an attempt at actually trying to draw some sort of a picture for you, now that I've gone to what I think about everything as usual. Trying to draw a picture of my experience or of your experience walking into these spaces. I think we've been through my experience quite a lot, so maybe let's go through what it might look like for you as a guest who was not there for 2 weeks before addressing the entire choose a venue, choose a venue, choose a venue cave system. but you've just walked in. You've been flown in from across the world to Central America and been put up in this beautiful, luxurious villa with, let's say, you're a woman, with 30 other women. And maybe you recognize a couple of them because they've been on the cover of Playboy. And you all get given times and dress codes and maybe some gifts even. And you are not being paid to be there, but you're very excited for this party. So you've already been set up in your villa, you've settled in for a day. You're told that the first event is tomorrow night. You get picked up, you share a big van with a few of the others from the house, and you go to somewhere that you're not really sure of. You signed an NDA. You've told somebody where you are. There's location tracking, but is there any reception? No. You get to the caves. You realize they're a cave system, but it's lit beautifully. There's red carpeting on the floor. There's people who look like they're probably performers, but like nymphs just on the side of the walkway, lit so perfectly, like dancing or interacting with each other. And some walk up to you and invite you in. They take away your phone. Explain that the evening will begin in half an hour and that they welcome you to mingle in this particular area. You mingle, you see more of these performers sort of crop up. Some of them sort of come past you and look you in the eye every now and then. They're dressed impeccably. There are super hot women everywhere. Where are the men? And then suddenly, half an hour, the lights go dark. There's another light in the other end of that cave, and you're ushered over while somebody stands on a platform and describes the evening's events. That it's a labyrinth, that you are to follow the pathways that are lit. And that down each pathway, an experience will find you, and that you are best to surrender to it. But if you need any help, the people in pink are there to assist you at all times. So you, with one of the people that you've bonded with from your house, villa, whatever, follow down this path. You go down this path, and at the end of it, there's a door. And there's somebody standing by the door, gazing at you, inviting you in. They hand you a blindfold and say that once you are inside, you will see some seats. So please have a seat and your blindfold ready. You walk in. You have a seat on the seat. There are 5 others already sat. And 3 people in pink appear. They explain that they will be blindfolding you. And that you are free to go whenever you wish. Just raise your hand. But there will be a story, and they will invite you to follow along and to lean in for maximum enjoyment. And a story starts to unfold. You're blindfolded. It feels a little cooler. Smells start to change. You're blindfolded, but you can tell the lights in the room are shifting. You're blindfolded, but there's suddenly a story in your ears with somebody telling you that they're coming up behind you. And a story starts to unfold where hands start to appear on your body, where you start to open up and lean into the depths of an orgasm brought on by an imperceptible being. And suddenly, the lights shift and the people in pink reappear, having taken off your blindfold. It's dark enough so that you can't really see the faces of the people who are also sat around you. And you are invited to leave the room and to continue down another path. You walk down the path back into the main cave, and it's still populated by incredibly beautiful women, dressed similarly to the dress code. There are slightly more men. You go down another path, and so on and so forth. Maybe you find me down one of those paths, but yeah. And then once the night is sort of done, you're probably shifted back to the villa in order for another day of activities, probably with a slightly different location on the next day, maybe on the water, maybe in a forest, maybe in a mansion, maybe in a castle. And yeah, it's a very elaborate experience and takes a lot of work and is really magical to see and comes with its own questions, as everything does with me, it seems. But thank you so much for listening. And I'm off to another uber rich sex party. Speak to you next time.